Imagine standing in a bustling marketplace in 10th century Chengdu, Sichuan. You see a merchant trying to buy a single roll of fine silk. He isn't reaching for a wallet. He's struggling with a heavy wooden wheelbarrow. It's loaded with over 130 pounds of iron coins, clinking, rusted, and freezing to the touch. In this era, to buy anything of real value, you didn't just need wealth. You needed a literal team of oxen to haul it across the mountains. The sheer physical weight of money was grinding the economy to a halt. But then you notice a small group of traders gathered around a quiet wooden counter. They aren't trading metal. Instead, they're exchanging small rectangular slips of mulberry bark, stamped with intricate red ink and official seals. One man walks away with a single piece of paper tucked into his sleeve, having just paid for an entire shipment of grain. To any observer from the West at the time, this would have looked like a collective delusion or a high-stakes magic trick, the act of turning worthless wood pulp into the lifeblood of an empire. What's fascinating is how quickly this convenience transformed into a tool of absolute state power. When the Song government saw these private notes, they didn't ban them. They nationalized them. They realized that if you could make people believe a piece of paper was worth a string of coins, you had discovered a financial alchemy more potent than gold. But as they looked closer at the transition from the Song to the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, a strange contradiction emerged. Marco Polo arrived and was mesmerized, writing in total awe about how the emperor could simply print value out of thin air. He saw it as the ultimate expression of strength. Yet, at that very same moment, the system was beginning to eat itself alive. The same magic that built the world's first fiat economy was creating a hidden monster inflation that would eventually leave the empire with vaults full of paper and markets full of nothing. It makes you wonder, at what point does a civilization's greatest innovation become the very thing that ensures its collapse?
That's a fantastic way to frame it. It really captures the core tension of what we're going to talk about today. This whole deep dive is about that incredible transformation of money from, a physical thing you hold to a system of belief that's held up by power.
Exactly. We're sort of tracing the line from a purely logistical problem, how do you move all this weight around, to something much more profound, the conceptual challenge of managing state-backed credit.
Yeah, and to really get that, we have to start way back. I mean, we tend to jump straight to coins when we think about old money.
Right. But we're going to start in section 1 and really appreciate the sheer difficulty of ancient exchange, this idea of a tyranny of weight.
Because money at its heart is a social convention. It's an institutional framework. It took a really long time to find materials that could, actually work efficiently within that framework.
Before you even get to metal coins, you had, all sorts of things. Economic exchange was all based on commodity money.
Absolutely. Things like cowrie shells, which were used all over Asia and Africa, or salt in the Mediterranean, even cocoa beans in Mesoamerica.
And these things were chosen for a reason, right? They had certain properties?
Yeah, they had to be divisible, durable, portable, and this is key fungible, meaning one unit is the same as any other. But all of these properties were really dependent on the context.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, take salt. It works great as money in a place where it's scarce and everyone needs it. But try using a block of salt to buy a horse. It's not exactly easy to divide up or carry around in your pocket.
I see. So it's localized.
Totally localized. Yeah. A really fascinating example is the use of cigarettes in prisoner of war camps during World War II.
Oh, right. I've heard about this.
Inside the camp, they worked perfectly as a currency. They were standardized, easy to carry, and pretty much everyone wanted them. So you had a little microeconomy.
But the second you step outside the barbed wire,
the whole system collapses. A pack of cigarettes is just a pack of cigarettes again. It just goes to show you that, trust and necessity are the real precursors to any kind of universal currency.
So that search for something more universal, more portable, more durable, that's what eventually led us to metal, to that big leap forward in Lydia around the 7th century BCE.
That Lydian innovation was a total game changer. And not just because they used electrum, that natural mix of gold and silver. The real genius was the institutional part.
The markings on the coin.
Exactly. The state started stamping them with a standard weight and their own specific markings. So this wasn't just a lump of metal anymore. It was metal that was verified by a sovereign power.
Which instantly creates trust.
It creates trust across a much wider area. Suddenly you can facilitate trade between strangers. And just as importantly, you solidify the authority of the state that's backing the coin.
But even that brilliant innovation standardized, verifiable metal ran into this almost ridiculous wall in 10th and 11th century China, specifically in Sichuan with their iron coins.
And that's the pivot for our whole story. Gold and silver work fine for big, high-value deals. But the Song economy was massive, and for various reasons it relied heavily on iron coinage. And iron, well, it has a much lower value per pound.
Which created this incredible burden. The records you read about it sound absurd.
They are. We're talking about needing hundreds of pounds of iron coins for a single purchase of tea or silk. That image you opened with 130 pounds of iron for one roll of silk, that's not an exaggeration.
If your transaction costs include hiring a guy and an ox just to move the payment, your economy can't function. It just stops.
It literally grinds to a halt. Think about trying to pay an army or collect taxes from a whole province when the money itself is the bottleneck. The very thing that's supposed to make things easier becomes the problem.
That's such an incredible irony. The coin, which was the solution to barter, becomes this new problem, a tyranny of weight.
And that tyranny forced an innovation, a market-driven one, which brings us to the role of credit.
Yeah, this is a part that I think people often get wrong. We assume paper money is where credit starts, but the idea of credit is way, way older than that.
Oh, absolutely. Credit might be the oldest financial concept there is. In the earliest human societies, long before money, everything ran on what you could call delayed reciprocity.
So an informal IOU system.
Basically, it's an informal, conditional kind of credit based entirely on social memory and personal trust. If I give you some of my food today, there's a social understanding that you'll help me out next week.
And the only thing enforcing that is your reputation.
Correct. The only enforcement is reputational risk. If you don't pay your debt, you get ostracized. And in a small interdependent group, that's a death sentence.
But that kind of social memory system completely breaks down once society gets bigger.
It breaks down fast. You can't rely on it when you're trading with strangers from a different village. You don't know them, you don't know their reputation.
Which is when institutions had to step in.
Yeah.
And the earliest examples of that are in Mesopotamia, right?
Yes. Ancient Sumer and Babylonia essentially invented institutional credit. Their huge temples and palaces weren't just religious or political buildings. They were massive economic clearinghouses, proto-banks.
They were lending out grain and silver and, crucially, keeping records.
Meticulous records. Those cuneiform tablets, they're basically the world's first accounting ledgers.
Wow.
And they're incredibly detailed. They track the loans, the borrowers, any collateral put up, the repayment schedules. The system was really sophisticated.
They even had standardized interest rates, didn't they?
They did, often around 33% for grain loans and 20% for silver. And they used barley as a standard unit of account, so they could value wool, metal, labor, everything in terms of barley for their debt tracking.
So this is way more than just lending. It's a centralized system for tracking debt and keeping value consistent. It's a real regulatory framework.
It is, and because the temple or the state was doing this, it actually delayed the need for private banking as we think of it. They were already performing that function.
So humanity had already figured out institutional debt. We'd figured out value tracking. The only problem left, the one those merchants in Sichuan were dealing with, was the physical weight of the medium itself.
Exactly, which leads us right into Section 2, this moment where financial innovation meets state capacity. That physical impossibility of moving iron forced those private merchants in Sichuan to come up with the Jiaozi, the promissory notes.
A brilliant market-based solution.
It really was. They just set up these deposit shops. A merchant could dump off their heavy iron coins and get a paper receipt, a certificate for that deposit.
And that slip of paper then started trading as if it were the money itself.
Right. But the risk was all localized. It was tied to the reputation of that one specific private shop that issued the note. If they went bust, your paper was worthless.
So that's the key question. If portability was the driver, how did the state make sure this didn't just become a counterfeiter's dream or collapse when a few of these private houses failed? This is where we see that Song dynasty blueprint for modern state capacity.
This was a moment of just profound insight from the government. The Song rulers looked at these private notes and they didn't see a threat. They didn't see a competing currency to be banned.
They saw a tool.
An incredibly powerful tool to be harnessed. So around the year 1023, the government stepped in and just took over the whole system. They nationalized the issuance of Jiaozi.
How do they even do that? I mean, how do you convince people to shift their trust from a local merchant they know to this, huge faceless government bureaucracy.
Well, they were very smart about it. They set up a permanent government office, the Jiaozi, to centralize all the printing and administration. And they immediately put in really strict controls to build that institutional legitimacy.
What kind of controls?
For one, they limited where the notes could be redeemed, which helped them manage liquidity. But the most critical thing was they set up limited circulation periods. A note was only valid for a set time. And they standardized how much could be issued in each period.
So they weren't just printing it like crazy. They were actively managing the supply to keep it scarce, to maintain its value.
Exactly. They were making sure that trust was no longer in the physical pile of coins sitting in a back room. The trust was now in the institutional framework of the state itself. The government was backing the paper with the full force of the law, and in the beginning at least, a guarantee that you could trade it back for copper coin.
That's the move that allows for economies of scale. Suddenly you have a uniform financial system across a huge empire. It's a fundamental transformation of state power.
It is. And it wasn't just done for, commercial convenience. It was driven by a really acute, almost existential fiscal need.
The military.
The Song dynasty was facing these immense challenges. They had moved away from the old feuding system,
where peasants who owned land served as part-time soldiers.
Right, which is relatively cheap. Instead, they were relying on the mubing system, a massive, professional, full-time mercenary army.
Which gives you military stability, but I can imagine the cost is just astronomical.
It's astronomical. The state had to maintain a standing army that sometimes numbered over 1 million men. To pay for that, you need a radical new way to generate revenue. You can't just rely on taxing farmers anymore.
And this is where we see that huge shift toward commercial taxes and state monopolies.
The numbers are just staggering. They tell the entire story of this fiscal revolution.
Lay them out for us.
Okay, so traditionally, taxes on agriculture were the main source of income for the Chinese state. In the earlier Tang dynasty, all the monetary taxes combined were only about 3.9% of the total annual revenue.
Okay, a tiny fraction.
A tiny fraction. By the year 1065, under the Northern Song, that number had exploded to 51.6% of total annual revenue.
Wow, so it went from less than 4% to over half.
Over half. It actually surpassed agricultural taxes for the first time in the history of Imperial China. That's a fundamental reversal.
It means the entire survival of the state now depends on its ability to manage commerce, not just land.
It completely changed the philosophy of government. The state basically became a giant merchant. The rulers started thinking in terms of management, accounting, costs, profits. They were actively trying to maximize their gains from monopolies.
And these weren't small-time operations. We're talking about state control over absolute essentials like salt, tea, and alcohol.
And much more. They had monopolies on alum, vinegar, spices, even luxury goods like jewelry. They also got really sophisticated about adapting their tax system. As cities grew, they made real estate taxes a major new source of revenue.
And they made sure their officials were on board with this new philosophy.
They had to. This utilitarian policy was baked into the bureaucracy. A local official wasn't just judged on, keeping the peace or making sure the harvest was good. A huge part of their performance review was how well they developed government markets and how much commercial tax they collected.
So their entire careers depended on the flow of this new paper money back to the capital.
Exactly. The whole system, from top to bottom, was now incentivized to grow the commercial economy.
So the state gets a new revenue stream for its army, and the paper money is the financial lever that makes it all work. Let's shift to Section 3, because this isn't just a story about government efficiency, it's about what that efficiency unleashed in the physical world. The connection between this financial innovation and China's industrial output is just incredible.
It's a direct cause and effect. The Song dynasty was able to achieve this industrial scale that was unparalleled anywhere in the world because the financial system was so efficient, the friction was gone.
And this period is widely seen as the absolute peak of technology in Imperial China.
You can just track it by the rate of innovation. If you look at the number of significant inventions, the rate almost triples during the Song era. It peaks between 1000 and 1250. There's no question it's the most technologically innovative period in their imperial history.
And we're not talking about small improvements. We're talking about massive intellectual leaps.
Look at mathematics. Chinese mathematicians were solving equations up to the 10th degree. They solved the Chinese remainder theorem in the 13th century. These are things that Europe wouldn't get to for hundreds of years.
And then there's the engineering. the famous Song's clock from 1088.
That clock was a masterpiece, a water-powered, mechanical, astronomical measuring device. And the critical piece of technology inside it was an escapement mechanism.
Which is the little device that makes a clock tick.
Yeah.
That regulates the gears.
Right, and he's using it centuries before it was fully developed in the West. But think about what it takes to build something like that. It requires huge logistical coordination of materials, skilled artisans, high-quality metal components.
And you just can't manage that kind of project if you're paying for everything with wheelbarrows full of iron coins.
You can't. Or look at textiles. By the 13th century, they're using treadle-operated, multi-spindle spinning wheels. They were even using water power for massive Ramey spinning wheels that had 32 spindles.
That's not a local craftsman. That's industrial production.
It is. It demands huge, coordinated supply chains. And it was the same story with their maritime logistics, their ability to move goods by sea.
They had a huge head start in shipbuilding.
A massive lead. They had been using watertight compartments in their ships since at least the 2nd century. It made their ships way more resilient. The magnetic compass was in common use by the 10th century, again, centuries ahead of the West. Paper currency made it possible to fund and provision these huge trade expeditions quickly and efficiently.
Even their head start in the very technologies we're talking about, paper and printing, played a direct role.
Of course. The move to using bamboo to make paper in the 12th century, for example, dropped the cost and improved the quality. And that technological efficiency was crucial for printing all this currency.
They even had multicolored printing.
Right, which was essential for making the paper money hard to counterfeit. So you see this direct link between their technological lead and their ability to maintain the integrity of their financial system.
So the paper money itself was this financial lubricant that drastically cut transaction costs. How did that change the actual landscape of the country?
It kick-started what historians call the embryonic stage of an economic revolution. You see 3 big things happen at once. First is the urbanization of the countryside. All these new, small, commerce-based towns start popping up everywhere,
Creating way more trade between rural and urban areas.
which puts a huge strain on the infrastructure. So that leads to the second thing, transportation improvements. A ton of public and private money gets poured into building a national network of roads, canals, and rivers.
So once you have that cheap, extensive national network,
That enables the third and most critical development, regional specialization. Regions stop trying to be self-sufficient. They focus on what they do best.
so you get iron production concentrated in one area, tea in another, ceramics somewhere else.
Exactly. The whole economy shifts toward large-scale, market-based production, and the iron industry is the perfect example of that.
The scale of it was just immense.
It was. And iron smelting needs this massive logistical coordination. You need ore from the mines, huge amounts of coal from the forests, sophisticated furnaces, all working in sync. The ability to transact value quickly across these regions with paper money was the tool that made that entire industrial machine work.
So the Song created this incredible tool for growth, but it also came with this hidden risk that their successors, the Mongols, were about to discover firsthand. Which takes us to the Yuan dynasty and their pioneering pure fiat system.
Right. The Mongol conquest sets the stage for the world's first truly pure fiat monetary system. After the southern Song collapsed, the Yuan dynasty from 1279 just completely abandoned the whole idea of metal reserves.
Which is a radical move. It's basically a statement of total confidence in the power of the state.
It is. A belief in state-backed credit and economic sovereignty centuries before you see anything like it in the West. And it's what completely fascinated foreign observers like Marco Polo.
He was just mesmerized by it, wasn't he?
Totally mesmerized. He served in Kublai Khan's court, and he wrote about it with this sense of just awe. He describes how the emperor could take the bark of a mulberry tree, which he says is basically worthless, stamp his seal on it, and turn it into money.
He saw it as the ultimate expression of the great Khan's power.
He did. He saw it as almost magical, this ability to create value out of thin air and have it be accepted across the entire empire.
So the Yuan leveraged this system. They showed that you could build a resilient economy based entirely on the authority of the state to enforce value.
The resilience came from the sovereign decree. The paper currency, the kao, was made the only legal tender for all major transactions. Paying your taxes, getting your official salary, you had to use it. That forced acceptance. It was the state saying, our word is the only collateral you need.
But the very purity of that system, the complete reliance on the state, contained its biggest vulnerability.
The temptation of the printing press. It's the classic Achilles heel of any fiat system. It all depends on the state having discipline. But the demands of running an empire, especially military demands, are often just too strong.
And that's what happened when Kublai Khan annexed the southern Song.
Exactly. He suddenly had millions more people and vast new lands. The existing currency, the Zongtong Keo, just wasn't enough to handle all the transactions.
So you get this strange situation, a currency famine, even though the state controls the printing.
Well, they did what you'd expect. They printed more. But without the economic growth to back it up, the value of the money in circulation just plummeted. At one point, the original Zongtong Keo lost something like 90% of its purchasing power.
A 90% collapse in value. That's financial ruin for ordinary people. How did the state respond to that?
With absolute authority. To restore faith, Kublai Khan did something incredible. He just abolished the old currency, declared it worthless, and he forced everyone to adopt a brand new currency, the Yuan Keo.
A complete systemic reset.
By pure decree. It's the ultimate demonstration of state control over money. They could literally declare a currency dead and create a new one overnight.
And we know this instability was directly linked to their military actions.
Oh, the correlation is undeniable. Historical analysis shows a clear positive link between high war involvement, whether it's external conquests or putting down internal rebellions, and inflation.
Wars are expensive.
Incredibly expensive. And this centralized fiat system was the perfect tool to fund them quickly, but every time they used it, they drove more currency into the system and eroded its value.
So the same financial alchemy that let them build and fund their empire was also creating the inflation that would eventually lead to unrest and help bring the empire down. It's a high-stakes trade-off.
And it establishes that core tension that has defined monetary policy ever since. The state's need for fast, flexible funding versus the economy's need for stability and predictability.
Now, if we look to the West, this whole story really puts the European experience in a different light. They took centuries longer to get to paper money, and they were much more hesitant about it.
It was a much more gradual process in Europe. Those early banknotes, like from the Bank of Stockholm in 1661 or the Bank of England in 1694, they started out as just receipts for gold and silver you deposited.
For a long time, credit was a private affair, right? Based on merchant networks and instruments like the Bill of Exchange.
The Bill of Exchange was critical. It was basically a sophisticated private IOU that let merchants settle debts across borders without shipping chests of gold. But it was all based on personal trust and reputation.
The Medici family built an empire on that kind of trust.
They did. The whole challenge for Europe was figuring out how to transfer that trust from the individual merchant to a public institution.
And that final step, anchoring public credit in the power of the state, that really came with the first central banks.
The founding of the Bank of England in 1694 is the pivotal moment. It was set up mainly to fund a war against France. But critically, it let the government issue long-term debt that was explicitly backed by Parliament's power to tax the population.
So that formalized the whole system. Trust was no longer personal. It was legal, political, and financial.
And in a way, Europe finally achieved the kind of institutional monetary control that the Song dynasty had engineered 600 years earlier. A system that allowed for efficient taxation and centralized spending.
It's the architecture you need for modern capitalism.
It is. It's the realization that the state's ability to tax and guarantee its own debt is the real engine of financial value, whether that value is a metal coin or a slip of paper.
Which brings us all the way to today, Section 5, and this digital reinvention of monetary authority. The conversation is changing again from paper to code, but the underlying struggle for control is exactly the same.
The vast majority of money today is already just electronic entries in a ledger. When you use a payment app or a credit card, there's no physical exchange. It's just a continuation of this move toward abstraction.
But the real new frontier, the thing that's a genuine step change, is the effort by states to maintain control through central bank digital currencies, CBDCs.
CBDCs are a profound attempt by nation-states to reassert their monetary authority in a digital world. They are, in essence, the ultimate digital version of that state monopoly that the Song dynasty first created.
And the most advanced example of this anywhere is China's eCNY. And here, the level of control goes beyond just managing the currency. It's about potentially managing the entire economy.
That is the crucial difference. The eCNY gives the central bank the technological ability to track and analyze every single transaction in real time. This allows for a top-down, granular management of all economic activity. It allows for programmability.
Programmability, what do you mean by that?
It means the central bank could potentially control not just the amount of money, but when and where that digital money can be spent. For example, they could issue stimulus payments that expire if you don't use them within a month, or they could restrict their use to only certain industries.
That is a level of control that goes way beyond anything possible with physical cash. It connects every economic act directly back to the central authority.
And it's also the state's direct response to the rise of decentralized alternatives like cryptocurrencies.
Right, which were born out of a distrust of that very centralized power, especially after the 2008 financial crisis.
Precisely. Cryptocurrencies tried to remove the state as a guarantor of trust. CBDCs are the state's move to reclaim that power in the digital age.
So the currency race today isn't about who has the most gold in their vaults.
Not at all. It's about who can build the best digital financial infrastructure. Geopolitical power is increasingly about controlling those digital pipes. Countries are racing to build systems that are faster, more secure, and become the standard for cross-border payments.
It gives them immense control over data and global money flows.
The struggle for monetary authority, for the power to control and enforce value, it's eternal. The only thing that changes is the technology, from a piece of mulberry bark to an encrypted digital entry.
When you look at that whole sweep of history, from the tyranny of iron coins that stopped the Song economy to the pure digital control of the CBDC era, the fundamental purpose of money has always evolved around reducing friction and maximizing state capacity. The ancient Chinese government perfected this financial alchemy by nationalizing paper notes, realizing that institutional legitimacy backed by sovereign power was far more potent than any metal. This centralization of monetary authority, designed to fund vast enterprises and accelerate economic growth, created the foundation for everything we understand about modern state finance.
The evolution of money reveals a continuous technological adaptation to the persistent problems of economic coordination and institutional legitimacy. Today, as digital systems mediate payments, identity schemes, and geopolitical positioning, the battle for control over monetary structure continues, showing that the foundational principles laid down in ancient China still determine the shape of modern finance.